Welcome, dear listener, to a journey into one of the most unsettling cases whispered about in the history of the American West. Before we begin, I invite you to share in the comments where you're tuning in from and the exact time on the clock as you listen. It's always fascinating to see how these stories travel at dawn at midnight, in the stillness of a long night, or in the bustle of midday. The year was 1870. Dodge City was hardly the notorious place it would later become. Back then, it was little more than a scatter of wooden structures rising out of the endless Kansas prairie. The history books tend to paint Dodge in broad strokes: gunfights, cattle drives, lawmen, and outlaws. But beneath those familiar stories lies another layer, a darker current that most historians have only glanced at, and fewer still have dared to follow to its steps. This is the story of the Prairie Rose Saloon and of the young women who vanished there without explanation. Their disappearances would remain hidden, almost forgotten, for nearly a century. In 1870, before Dodge earned its reputation as the wickedest little city in America, it was simply a crossroads. Buffalo hunters, soldiers, wandering settlers. These were the travelers who passed through. The railroad had not yet reached the town, but rumors of its coming drew all manner of fortune seekers hoping to stake their claim on what would surely become an important stop along the expanding frontier. Among those drawn west was a man named Conrad Willoughby. He had arrived from St. Louis with both capital and ambition. With that, he set his sights on Front Street, where he purchased a lot on March 8, 1870, as recorded in the Ford County Register. That yellowing entry preserved today on microfilm at the Kansas State Historical Society tells us Willoughby paid $450 in gold for the property, and between $50 and $200 more for the construction of a 2-story wooden building of better quality than most around it. The clerk who wrote it down, Elijah Wilson, described Willoughby as a man of means and education. Originally of Boston, now making his way west through St. Louis. But Willoughby was no ordinary saloon keeper. Over 6 feet tall, with impeccable posture, he carried himself with the refinement of an Eastern gentleman. His accent was polished, his mustache always trimmed, his black suit never abandoned even under the punishing Kansas sun. Locals described him as a man somehow out of place and out of time. What had drawn such a figure to this rough, often violent edge of America? That question would haunt later investigators. One surviving image, a daguerreotype preserved in the Western History collection of the Denver Public Library, may capture his likeness. Labeled simply Proprietor Dodge City, 1870, it shows a man around 40 years old. Deep-set eyes peer out from beneath heavy brows, a sharp nose-thin lips curled into what might be called a permanent, slight smile. His gaze carries a peculiar intensity, something at odds with the formality of the portrait. The Prairie Rose Saloon opened in April of that year. Unlike the smoky, rowdy dens that dotted most frontier towns, it was marked by a surprising degree of cleanliness. Its shelves carried fine imported spirits. But the true distinction of the Prairie Rose lay not in its whiskey, but in its women. Yes, saloon girls were a common sight in towns of the West. But Willoughby's employees were different. They were startlingly young, undeniably beautiful, and, as contemporary accounts recorded, refined in a way unusual for frontier women. Patrons remarked that they seemed educated many from good families and carried the manners of Eastern society ladies rather than the hardened air of women forced into survival. An advertisement printed in the Western Times on April 12th of 1870 announced the new establishment, the Prairie Rose Saloon, welcomes gentlemen of discerning taste, fine spirits imported from Europe and the East, musical entertainment nightly, conversation and companionship of the most refined quality, conducted with the utmost propriety. See Willoughby proprietor. How Willoughby managed to recruit these women is unclear. Surviving records offer no hint of their origins, no trails from families or hometowns. What we do know comes from a discovery made decades later. In 1964, during renovations to what had once been the county clerk's office, a ledger was found. Inside were careful entries that told a chilling pattern between April and December of 1870. 7 young women arrived in Dodge City, and each one began working at the Prairie Rose. Their names appear one after another in the ledger, neat entries on fading paper. Elizabeth Kent arrived April 3rd. Catherine Woodhouse, April 17th. Margaret Bell, May 22nd. Sarah Holloway, June 14th. Jane Wilson, July 30th. Emma Lancaster, September 5th. Clara Morrison, October 12th. 7 young women, 7 beginnings that all ended in silence. By February of 1871, every single one of them had vanished without explanation. The stagecoach office records carefully kept confirmed their arrivals. Each entry noted the same pattern they had come in from St. Louis on the Eastern Line. Each carried 1 trunk, a few personal belongings, and stated employment as their reason for travel. None of them were ever recorded as leaving Dodge City. The first disappearance was Elizabeth Kent. Patrons at the Prairie Rose recalled that on the night of May 12, 1870, she simply failed to appear for her shift. When asked, Willoughby offered a ready explanation. She had received word that her mother was gravely ill and had taken the morning stage back east. Few thought twice about it. After all, life on the frontier was transient. People came and went without warning. But a letter uncovered almost a century later tells a different story. In 1968, among the belongings of Alonzo Davis, who had once worked as a bartender at the Prairie Rose, a letter to his sister in Cincinnati surfaced. It was dated May 10th, just 2 days before Elizabeth disappeared. In it, Davis wrote, "Miss Kent and Mr. W had words last night after closing. She threatened to return east, saying conditions were not as represented in his correspondence. He took her aside, and though I could not hear what was said, she emerged quite pale. She worked her shift today, but seems altered somehow. Speaks little and starts at sudden noises. 2 days later, she was gone." Davis's later letters grew even more unsettling. On June 3rd, he wrote cryptically, "Another girl has arrived from back east." Mr. W has a way of replacing those who leave his employ with remarkable efficiency. I sometimes wonder at the coincidence. Just weeks after Elizabeth Catherine Woodhouse vanished. Again, Willoughby had a plausible story. She had supposedly met a cattle drover, fallen in love, and departed south for Texas. The pattern repeated through the summer and fall. Each woman stayed for 6 to 8 weeks, then vanished. Each time, Willoughby explained it away: news from home, a sudden opportunity, an unexpected marriage. Once in the case of Jane Wilson, he claimed she had died of fever and been buried outside town. Yet no record of such a burial exists in county archives. The town might have gone on, accepting these disappearances indefinitely, shrugging them off as the ordinary comings and goings of frontier life. But in February of 1871, a complication arrived in the form of Thomas Morrison. Thomas was the elder brother of Clara Morrison, the last of the 7 women. For months he had received no letters from her. Clara had always written faithfully, and when her silence stretched too long, Thomas left Philadelphia and came west to Dodge City in search of answers. The winter that year had been unusually warm. A thaw had left the unpaved streets of Dodge City deep in mud, but Thomas pressed on. According to the Western Times, preserved today on microfilm, he took a room at Zimmerman's boarding house on February 7th. The register later destroyed in an 1885 fire, but copied into surviving notes, listed him simply as T. Morrison, Esquire, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He paid 2 weeks' lodging in advance using crisp Eastern banknotes. It wasn't long before he confronted Conrad Willoughby at the Prairie Rose. When asked about Clara, Willoughby gave the same smooth explanation he had given others. She had left with a wealthy cattle baron for his ranch in Colorado Territory. But Thomas wasn't convinced. His sister, he insisted, would never have left without telling her family. And there was proof of that in the letters she had written. One fragment preserved in the Morrison family Bible and later photographed for historian Rebecca Harmon in 1963 reads, "The work is not what I expected, but the pay is good, and I shall persevere for the agreed upon year." Mr. W. can be demanding, but is fair in his way. I find the other girls pleasant companions, though they too seem disappointed by the nature of our employment. Still, I shall have enough saved by next autumn to return home and begin my life with Charles as we have planned. Her intention had been clear: save for 1 year, then return to Philadelphia to marry her fiancé. She had no reason to vanish into the arms of a cattle baron, and so for the first time, the tidy explanations of Conrad Willoughby began to unravel. The letter from Clara dated November 18th, 1870, less than 3 months before she vanished, was the last her family ever received. At first, Thomas Morrison's questions stirred little reaction in Dodge City. But as he pressed on, as he asked again and again where the women had gone, inconsistencies began to surface. No stage drivers remembered transporting them. No witnesses recalled marriages or departures. There were no goodbyes, no sightings, only silence. Each disappearance existed solely on the word of Conrad Willoughby. The turning point came when Morrison persuaded Deputy Marshal Wyatt Earp to accompany him to the Prairie Rose after hours. No official report of what they found was ever filed. But in 1957, during research for a biography, Earp's personal journal was uncovered. One entry dated February 16, 1871 reads, "Examined the premises at Morrison's insistence. Found nothing to substantiate his concerns regarding his missing sister. However, the cellar beneath the establishment bears evidence of recent excavation. W explains this as necessary repairs to the foundation. Something about the man's manner raises my suspicions. Morrison intends to telegraph authorities in Philadelphia tomorrow and request a formal investigation. I have advised caution as we have no evidence of wrongdoing, merely absence and contradiction." Still, I am troubled. The very next day, February 17th, 1871, Thomas Morrison disappeared. When asked about his whereabouts, Willoughby again had an explanation at the ready. He claimed Morrison had received a telegram stating his sister Clara had been located in Denver and that he had departed at once by private conveyance. It might have satisfied the townspeople, except for one fatal flaw. In February of 1871, Dodge City did not yet have a working telegraph line. No telegram could have been received. That single discrepancy drew Wyatt Earp's attention. On February 19th, he returned to the Prairie Rose with several men and conducted a full search. The official records that survived fragile pages spared only partly from the courthouse fire of 1885 state blandly that no evidence of wrongdoing was discovered. Willoughby was not charged. Yet, another piece of the puzzle emerged more than a century later. In 1996, the private journal of Dr. William Tremaine came to light. His entry for that day offers a darker glimpse. Deputy Marshal E. requested my presence during examination of the PR premises. Cellar shows evidence of recent excavation. Observed what appear to be blood stains on lower walls, though W. attributes these to slaughter of hogs. Most troubling discovery of a small chamber beyond the cellar concealed by a narrow door. Space approximately 8 feet square. Narrow cot affixed with restraints. Various implements whose purpose I hesitate to speculate upon. A journal written in cipher also recovered. E has taken possession. W claims ignorance of the chamber, suggesting it predates his purchase. The explanation strains credulity. 3 days later, Conrad Willoughby closed the Prairie Rose, liquidated his assets, and vanished from Dodge City. The Stagecoach office ledger notes his departure on February 22nd, bound for Denver with 1 trunk and 2 valises. What the ledger omits was later revealed in the correspondence of a stage driver named Samuel Clemens. No relation to the author. Clemens described transporting not only the luggage, but a large wooden crate roughly 4 feet in length, which Willoughby insisted must be kept upright at all times. The matter might have faded into rumor. One more half-remembered tale from the rough years of the frontier, had it not been for what happened in the spring of 1892. On April 14th, the Dodge City Times published a short article. Workers digging the foundation for a new mercantile building on the old Prairie Rose site had made a grisly discovery: human remains buried deep in the earth. The article was vague, stating only that the remains had been removed for proper Christian burial. It offered no numbers, no descriptions, only a dismissive assurance that since many early deaths had gone unrecorded, no further inquiry was necessary. But another account one never meant. For public eyes tells a more chilling story. In his private journal, County Coroner Walter Jenkins wrote on April 12, 1892, called to the old Prairie Rose site today. Construction halted upon discovery of human remains. Initial examination reveals multiple bodies, at least 6 possibly more in various states of decomposition. All appear to be female based on skeletal structure and remnants of clothing. Most disturbing of all was the manner of burial. The bodies had not been laid to rest with care, but discarded haphazardly with little ceremony. Several skeletons bore signs of restraints at the wrists and ankles. Jenkins advised the sheriff to widen the excavation to uncover the full extent of what lay beneath the soil. But the very next day, on April 13th, Jenkins's journal takes a darker turn. Sheriff has ordered excavation stopped and site filled in. Remains removed to cemetery for immediate burial in a common grave. No further examination permitted. When I questioned this decision, I was told higher authorities had been consulted. They determined public knowledge of details would serve no good purpose and might tarnish the town's improving reputation. I'm instructed to list cause as unknown, time of death indeterminate, prior to 1880. A most unsatisfactory resolution to a matter that warrants further inquiry, and with that, The Prairie Rose mystery was buried, literally and figuratively. For 70 years, Dodge City remembered the cattle drives and the gunfights, while the vanished women faded into silence. That silence was broken in 1963 when a doctoral student at the University of Kansas, Rebecca Harmon, began researching the social history of women in frontier communities. Turning over microfilmed newspapers, county records, and yellowing letters, she stumbled upon the ghost of the Prairie Rose. Her notes, now preserved in the university archives, reveal her growing obsession. Curious pattern emerging, she wrote on March 17, 1963. 7 young women arrive in Dodge City, 1870, all employed at the same establishment. All disappear within months. No death certificates, no marriage records, no documents of departure. It is as though they simply vanished. Even more curious, the absence of official concern. Digging deeper, Harmon discovered the Prairie Rose was not unique. In an unpublished dissertation, she laid out a chilling pattern. The disappearances in Dodge City mirrored cases in other frontier towns. Denver, 1872. Cheyenne, 1873. Deadwood, 1876. Tombstone, 1879. In each, a well-spoken, educated man appeared opening a saloon with unusually refined young women as employees. In each, the women vanished, and in each, the proprietor abruptly closed up and disappeared once questions were raised. The names changed: Charles Wellington in Denver, Edward Chambers in Cheyenne, James Worthington in Deadwood, Richard Peaton in Tombstone. But the physical descriptions matched with eerie precision. Tall, sharply dressed, refined manner with a distinctive mustache and piercing eyes. Even the advertisements for staff were nearly identical, differing only in location and the name signed at the bottom. It cannot be coincidence, Harmon wrote. Her work might have remained hidden in an academic archive, another forgotten dissertation, if not for Ford County Sheriff Lawrence Parker. A history enthusiast himself, Parker stumbled across her findings in 1964. In a letter dated May 10th, preserved in the County Historical Society, Parker urged Harmon to come to Dodge City. The site of the original Prairie Rose was scheduled for redevelopment, and he saw an opportunity to investigate before the land was forever disturbed. Harmon arrived in June, accompanied by a team from the university's archaeology department. With Parker's authorization, they excavated the old foundations of the saloon. The official report vanished into county files, never released to the public. But in Harmon's private journal, found among her effects after her death in 1968, the truth survives. Excavation reveals remains of 9 individuals, she wrote. 7 female, consistent with age, and physical description of missing saloon girls. The other 2 sets of remains were male. One was buried with personal effects, suggesting he may have been Thomas Morrison himself. None of them had been laid to rest with ceremony. They had been discarded, hastily covered over, as though their deaths were an inconvenience rather than a tragedy. Harmon's notes are careful, almost clinical, but the details she allows through are deeply unsettling. She references evidence of restrained prolonged confinement and signs of systematic malnutrition. Most disturbing of all are her mentions of unusual post-mortem treatment and ritualistic positioning. She never elaborates, leaving only those haunting phrases as clues. A page dated June 28, 1964 contains one of her most troubling entries. Dr. L believes evidence suggests the victims did not die at once. They were held weeks, perhaps months before death. The implications are too disturbing to dwell upon. What manner of man could perpetrate such acts, and how did he escape detection in a community as small as Dodge City was in 1870? The excavation's official report was submitted to Sheriff Parker on July 7th. 3 days later, the dig was abruptly terminated. The cellar was filled and construction resumed, and the matter was declared closed. Harmon, baffled and angry, wrote in her notes, "Sheriff P. has informed me the matter is being referred to higher authorities due to its historical nature and lack of relevance to current criminal concerns. I am instructed to suspend all research and public discussion pending review by unnamed federal agencies." No such review was ever documented. Harmon removed all references to the excavation from her dissertation and left academia the following year. In a letter to her advisor, dated September 15, 1965, she confessed, "I cannot escape the feeling that even now, nearly a century later, there are those who do not wish the full truth to emerge. Perhaps they are right. Some aspects of our nation's past are better left unexplored." In 1968, Harmon died in what was described as a household accident. Her papers were boxed and stored at the University of Kansas untouched for more than a decade. When historian Martin Calloway revisited them in 1982, he tried to track down the excavation report. The Ford County Sheriff's Office, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, even federal archives all denied any record of it. What Calloway did uncover was testimony from Dr. James Fletcher, one of the archaeologists on site. Fletcher refused details bound by a confidentiality agreement, but his words to Calloway were chilling. What we found beneath that saloon went beyond murder. Some forms of evil leave traces that time cannot erase. There are cases where perhaps it is better that the full truth remains buried. Pressed further, Fletcher added, "This wasn't frontier violence, not gunfights, not robberies. What happened in that cellar was systematic, prolonged, conducted with clinical precision." Calloway also interviewed the widow of Sheriff Parker. Among Parker's papers, she found a letter written before his death in 1979. In it, he confessed that individuals had visited him in 1964 warning him that further investigation would not be in his best interests. He closed with a chilling line, "Some truths serve no purpose but to haunt those who know them." For decades, the story lay buried again. The old saloon site was redeveloped, paved over, forgotten. But in 1996, during courthouse renovations, a sealed metal box was found hidden in a wall cavity. Inside was a leather-bound journal belonging to Dr. William Tmain, the Dodge City physician from 1869 to 1873. At first, the entries seemed ordinary: births, deaths, outbreaks of disease. But in May of 1870, they took a darker turn. Tmain recorded being summoned to the Prairie Rose to treat Elizabeth Kent, one of the young women. Willoughby claimed she had fallen down the stairs. Tmain's notes tell another story. Patient exhibits contusions inconsistent with reported accident. Ligature marks visible at wrists and ankles. Signs of prolonged restraint. When questioned privately, patient became agitated, insisted nothing was amiss. Fear evident in her manner. W remained present throughout despite requests for privacy. He continues. Miss K's physical state suggests inadequate nutrition over weeks. Complexion. Pale hands trembling. Most troubling her affect as though her mind were elsewhere. When I inquired further, W interrupted, insisting all his employees enjoyed comfort and abundance. Miss K nodded in agreement, but without conviction. Tremaine prescribed tonics and rest, but his entry closes grimly. I doubt these will address the true cause of her condition. 2 weeks later, Tremaine records that he inquired after Elizabeth Kent's health during a casual visit to the Prairie Rose. Willoughby informed him that she had left for the east. The suddenness of her departure strikes me as peculiar given the severity of her injuries. More troubling is W's insistence that she left no forwarding address and expressed no desire to settle her outstanding account with me. This is inconsistent with the character of the young woman as I observed it. In the weeks that followed, Tremaine made similar notes about other women. First injuries, then abrupt disappearances, with explanations that rang hollow. His unease grew, but he seemed paralyzed, unsure of what action to take. On January 3rd, 1871, he finally confided his concerns to Sheriff D. The response was chilling. Was informed in no uncertain terms that W is a valued citizen whose establishment brings considerable revenue to our growing community. Frontier life is inherently transient, and in the absence of any formal complaint from the women themselves, no official action can or will be taken. The sheriff reminded him that his position as county physician depended on the goodwill of commissioners, many of whom were regular patrons of the Prairie Rose. The implication was clear. Pursuing the matter could cost him his livelihood, or worse. On February 20th, 1871, Tremaine made his final and most disturbing entry. Deputy Marshal E requested my presence during examination of the PR premises. Cellar shows evidence of recent excavation, observed what appear to be bloodstains on the lower walls, though W attributes these to the slaughter of a hog. Most troubling was the discovery of a small chamber beyond the main cellar, accessed via a concealed door. The space, approximately 8 feet square, contained a narrow cot, affixed with restraints, various implements whose purpose I hesitate to speculate upon, and a journal written in cipher I cannot decipher. E has taken possession of said journal. W claims ignorance, suggesting it predates his purchase of the property. The explanation strains credulity. Tremaine continues with details. He admits he is reluctant to record. The chamber bears evidence of recent occupation. Found several long strands of hair, blonde in color, consistent with Miss M's appearance. Also noted scratches upon the interior of the door as though made by fingernails. The implications are too horrible to contemplate. E has sworn me to secrecy, intending to consult federal authorities before proceeding. I pray that justice will be served, though I fear W's influence may prove an obstacle. 3 days later, Willoughby abruptly closed the Prairie Rose and vanished from Dodge City. Tremaine's journal returned to ordinary medical notes. The matter was never mentioned again. The cipher journal seized by Deputy Marshal Herb was never located. After Herb's death, his papers were dispersed into private collections. If he ever transcribed its contents, they have never come to light. Over a century later, in 1997, forensic anthropologist Dr. Elena Vasquez of the University of Arizona analyzed soil samples taken from the Prairie Rose site during construction. Her findings, published in the Journal of Forensic Sciences, confirmed the presence of human remains dating to the early 1870s. More disturbingly, she identified chemical traces consistent with embalming and preservation techniques. Embalming was rare on the frontier in that era, especially for hasty, unmarked burials. Its presence suggested deliberate preparation and specialized knowledge. The implications drew attention to a recurring detail in the old accounts. Before arriving in Dodge City, Conrad Willoughby claimed to have studied medicine in Europe. No formal records of his education survive, but patrons of the Prairie Rose remembered him demonstrating unusual anatomical knowledge, even treating injuries when no doctor was available. This connection gained further weight in 1999, when a letter was discovered in the archives of the Missouri Historical Society. Written in 1867 by Dr. A. Heinrich Miller of Vienna to a colleague in Boston, it referenced an American student. I regret to inform you that the individual about whom you inquire was indeed briefly associated with our institution. He was dismissed from the program in 1865 due to concerns regarding his unusual interest in certain unorthodox theories and practices. While his technical knowledge was impressive, several professors noted his apparent lack of appropriate professional detachment and ethical boundaries. I would caution against any professional association with this individual, as his understanding of medical practice appears fundamentally misaligned with the humanitarian principles of our profession. Though the letter does not name Willoughby directly, the timing and circumstances align closely with what little is known of his early background. If he was indeed the student referenced, it suggests that the Prairie Rose Saloon may have been more than a front for criminal vice. It may have served as a venue for something far more sinister. The case darkened further in 2002, when historian Patricia Reynolds published an analysis of employment advertisements placed in Eastern newspapers between 1869 and 1879. She discovered a recurring pattern: notices seeking refined young ladies of good character for respectable employment in the Western Territories. They promised high wages, transportation, and social advancement. The wording varied little. Only the cities and post office boxes changed. One advertisement published in the Boston Daily Globe on January 17, 1870, read in part, "Opportunity for young ladies of refinement. Employment in a genteel establishment in the Western Territories. Must be unmarried, between 18 and 25, of attractive appearance and possessed of musical or conversational talents. Transportation provided. References required and provided. Inquire by letter to Box 471 Central Post Office, Boston." The advertisements would appear for 2 weeks, then vanish, only to reappear in other cities: Philadelphia, New York, Chicago. When Reynolds cross-referenced the timing with Rebecca Harmon's earlier research, the correlation was nearly perfect. Within weeks of each advertisement, a new saloon appeared in the West, hiring several young women. Months later, the proprietor would disappear, and so too would the women. Reynolds estimated that between 1869 and 1879, as many as 60 young women may have been lured west by these advertisements. Many were never heard from again. What became of Conrad Willoughby is less clear. Reports place him in Denver, San Francisco, even Vancouver, each time under a new name, each time repeating the same pattern, opening a respectable saloon, hiring refined young women, followed by disappearances and an abrupt departure. The last potential sighting appears in an 1882 police report from Seattle, where a man matching his description was questioned in connection with missing women, but released for lack of evidence. After that, the trail goes cold. One final clue surfaced in 1998 when researcher David Lindstrom uncovered a passport application filed in New Orleans in 1883 under the name Conrad Wilhelm. The photograph bore a striking resemblance to descriptions of Willoughby. The document listed his intended destination as Europe, principally Austria and Germany, for purposes of medical research. Passenger records confirm that a man by that name departed for Liverpool aboard the Crescent on September 17, 1883. Whether Wilhelm was indeed Willoughby and what became of him in Europe remains unknown. War-poor record-keeping and the passage of time have obscured the trail. If he did return to Europe, he effectively escaped all accountability for his actions in America. The story of the Prairie Rose Saloon remains a dark counterpoint to the myth of the American West. Behind tales of cattle drives, lawmen and gunfighters lies another frontier, one of isolation, silence, and lawlessness where predators moved unseen. What truly happened to Elizabeth Kent, Catherine Woodhouse, Margaret Bell, Sarah Holloway, Jane Wilson, Emma Lancaster and Clara Morrison? Their remains, if they were among those discovered beneath the prairie, Rose were reinterred without ceremony in a common grave in Dodge City Cemetery. A brief county record dated July 1964 notes that no family members were notified. No memorial marks their passing. Their silence, and the silence of those who might have spoken for them, is perhaps the most haunting part of all. They came west during a period of American expansion, seeking opportunity and independence at a time when such paths were scarce for women. Fragments of correspondence and official records suggest they were educated, ambitious, and hopeful. Yet their disappearances warranted barely a mention in contemporary accounts, and subsequent investigations were repeatedly suppressed or abandoned. In 1968, shortly before her death, researcher Rebecca Harmon wrote a private letter to her faculty advisor, which remained sealed until 2010. In it, she confessed, "What troubles me most is not what I found, but what remains hidden. The pattern extends beyond what I've documented. I am certain of it. At every turn, I encounter resistance. Records removed or destroyed. Witnesses unwilling to speak. It is as though some unseen hand has moved through history, systematically erasing evidence of these crimes." One must ask, why does this particular case, now nearly a century old, still evoke such protective silence? Her letter closes with an unsettling conclusion. Willoughby, or whatever name he carried, was not acting alone. The scale and duration of his activities, spanning multiple territories, suggests organization and protection beyond the reach of a single man. More troubling still, the consistent reluctance of authorities to pursue investigations hints at something systemic, a network with influence across jurisdictions. Support for this claim appeared in 2008, when a letter was discovered among the personal effects of Judge William Hardin of the Wyoming Territorial Court. Dated August 1873, it concerned missing women from a Cheyenne establishment. Hardin wrote, "I have been advised by persons of influence that this matter is to be handled with the utmost discretion. The proprietor, though now departed, is understood to have connections to individuals of significant standing, both here and in the East. A thorough investigation would embarrass persons whose reputations must, for the greater good, remain unblemished. The matter is closed without proceedings. The implication is unmistakable protection for the guilty extended well beyond local authorities. Whether born of complicity, financial interests, or the fear of scandal, justice was deliberately obstructed. Today, visitors to Dodge City will find no mention of the Prairie Rose or its vanished women. The structure that stands on Front Street bears no plaque or marker. In 2012, local historian Margaret Whitman proposed a memorial near the site. The City Council rejected the idea, citing insufficient documentation and concerns about tarnishing the town's historical image. Her research was declined by the county archives, and she later left Dodge City altogether. And so the story remains scattered in sealed letters, forgotten archives, marginal notes, and soil yet unexamined beneath modern buildings. The Prairie Rose case is a reminder that history is not only what is preserved and celebrated, but also what is erased. The disappearance of 7 women in 1870 was not an anomaly, but part of a broader pattern of erasure repeated across the frontier. For every Elizabeth Kent, Catherine Woodhouse, and Margaret Bell, whose names survive, countless others remain unrecorded, lost to a silence carefully maintained. The story of the Prairie Rose raises difficult questions about historical memory and accountability. How do we reconcile the romanticized myth of westward expansion with the exploitation and violence that so often accompanied it? What responsibility do our institutions carry today in acknowledging injustices that were deliberately forgotten? And perhaps most unsettling of all, what does the long deliberate suppression of this case suggest about the persistence of power and influence across generations? In 2015, a discovery in the digitized records of the territorial courts brought a chilling perspective. Among the files was a private memorandum dated 1874, written by a federal marshal whose name had been carefully redacted. It was addressed to a superior in Washington and read, "The matter we have discussed regarding establishments in various territories catering to certain specialized tastes of influential individuals has been addressed as directed. Proprietors have been advised of the necessity of discretion and mobility. Local authorities have been counseled on the proper handling of any untoward incidents. I believe we can consider this matter settled in a manner that protects all concerned parties while allowing necessary services to continue under proper management." This was not the protection of a single criminal. It implied a system organized, coordinated, and known to men in positions of authority. If accurate, it reveals complicity at an institutional level stretching far beyond the corruption of a few local sheriffs in frontier towns. Dr. Twain, upon learning of Conrad Willoughby's departure from Dodge City, wrote in his journal, "I cannot help but feel that justice has been neither served nor sought in this matter. Those young women came west seeking opportunity and advancement. Instead, they found something else entirely. Their fate should not be forgotten, yet I fear it already has been. In a place where life is held cheap and memory is short, what chance has truth against convenience and commerce? Perhaps someday," he wrote, "the truth would be uncovered. Until then, those who suspected but could not prove were left to carry the weight of silent knowledge. That silence has stretched across generations, passed from one researcher to the next, waiting for the moment when the shadows surrounding the Prairie Rose Saloon are finally pierced. Standing today on the streets of Dodge City, it takes little imagination to hear, beneath the sound of traffic and tourist chatter, the echoes of those who vanished. Their stories, fragmented, incomplete, testify to the darker currents that ran beneath the surface of American expansion. Currents that many would prefer remain unacknowledged. In the final entry of her journal, written just 3 weeks before her death, Rebecca Harmon left a passage that reads as both warning and exhortation. I have come to believe that there are forces in our society that transcend individual lifetimes. Institutions that protect their own across generations. What happened to those women in Dodge City? Denver, Cheyenne, and elsewhere was not merely the work of one depraved man. It was enabled by a system that valued certain lives above others, that weighed justice against convenience and chose the latter. That system did not die with Conrad Willoughby. It evolved, adapted, and continues in forms we may not recognize, but would find equally abhorrent were they fully exposed. The greatest disservice we can do to Elizabeth Kent and the others is to imagine that their suffering belongs safely to the past. That warning gained new weight in 2018 when construction workers in Vancouver uncovered a sealed wall cavity in an old building. Inside was a small metal box containing photographs from the 1870s and 1880s. Most depicted young women posed formally. On the backs of several names appeared E. Kent C. Morrison. Alongside them were personal trinkets, a locket, rings, a simple hair comb. The discovery reignited interest in the Prairie Rose case. A small group of dedicated historians continues to piece together its fragments, scouring archives across North America and Europe. The truth may never be fully known, but their work ensures that Elizabeth Kent, Catherine Woodhouse, Margaret Bell, Sarah Holloway, Jane Wilson, Emma Lancaster, and Clara Morrison are not erased entirely. They remind us that beneath the polished myths of the American West lies another history, one of exploitation, suffering, and lives stolen. They remind us how easily such stories can be erased when they threaten more comfortable narratives. And they remind us of the courage it takes to bring them back into the light. The Prairie Rose Saloon itself has long since vanished its site, built over many times. No marker identifies it. Most who pass the building have no idea what happened beneath its foundations. Yet, in archives, in suppressed reports, and perhaps still in the soil of Dodge City, echoes remain. Dr. Elena Vasquez, in her 1997 paper, offered a haunting observation. The soil remembers what human records often choose to forget. In the strata beneath our cities lie the true stories of our past, waiting to be uncovered by those willing to dig beneath the surface of official narratives. For Elizabeth Kent and the others, acknowledgement remains incomplete. Their names, however, have not been lost. Through the persistence of researchers who refuse to let silence prevail, they are remembered. The mystery of the Prairie Rose Saloon is not fully solved, but it has been partly illuminated, a dark corner of history brought back into view. It stands as a reminder that America's past is not only a story of progress and freedom, but also of exploitation and erasure. And as the quiet streets of Dodge City continue on, those who know the story still hear the echoes of 1870. In those echoes lie a challenge to keep searching, however uncomfortable the answers may be, and to ensure that the silences in our history are not left permanent. And so we return to where we began, a small village in Kansas, swallowed by prairie winds and oblivion. Of what once was Prairie Rose, only faint traces remain, a few bricks in the dirt, a half-collapsed wine cellar, and a name that echoes in forensic records, in hidden letters, in blood-soaked soil that has never been silent. The authorities once declared that nothing happened here, but the soil, the ashes, and the stories tell otherwise. And as Dr. Vasquez said, the soil does not forget. It only waits for someone to listen. Perhaps that is the legacy of Prairie Rose. Not just a hidden tragedy of the West, but a reminder that even in silence, there are voices waiting to be heard. And every time we tell them, even if only whispered them on a quiet evening, we fight back against oblivion a little more. Which leaves the question for you, the listener. If Prairie Rose has been almost completely erased, yet its traces remain, how many other stories, communities, people have disappeared without a trace?